Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump laying out priorities at his first official cabinet meeting. What he's announcing about slashing government size and hitting more countries with tariffs. Iris Tao at the White House. House Democrats and Republicans continue the scrutiny of USAID, what DOGE has uncovered, and the Trump administration's actions. Jason Blair reports from Capitol Hill. The U.S. and Ukraine are set to sign a deal for Ukraine's rare earth minerals on Friday, but Washington and Kyiv are sharing slightly different perspectives on its status. Arian Pasdar has the latest. Thousands of people turned out to honor members of the Bibas family who were killed in Hamas captivity. Meanwhile, Hamas says it's planning to release the bodies of 4 more hostages in exchange for prisoners. Jason Perry reports. A measles outbreak in West Texas, taking the life of a school-aged child. What health officials are saying. We'll bring you details.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Chris Beers, in for Tiffany Meyer. At his first official cabinet meeting, President Trump backs Elon Musk's work to reform the government while announcing more tariffs. Joining us live now is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What are the main takeaways from this key meeting?
Good evening to you as well. So President Trump today held his first cabinet meeting in his second term, and that's as Elon Musk was in the spotlight, sitting just away from the table of major secretaries. President Trump made clear his top priority of slashing the size of the federal government and to reduce the $2 trillion in U.S. deficits. Watch.
We're cutting down the size of government. We have to. We're bloated. We're sloppy. We have a lot of people that aren't doing their job.
And President Trump, while saying that his secretaries have a lot of respect for Elon Musk, also did acknowledge that some do disagree with him a little bit. But Trump defended Musk's work, while Elon Musk himself, speaking before any of the secretaries did, spoke of personal threats against him. Watch.
He's sacrificing a lot and getting a lot of praise, I'll tell you, but he's also getting hit.
And taking a lot of flack and getting a lot of death threats, by the way. I'm going to like stack him up, you know. But if we don't do this, America will go bankrupt.
And President Trump today also signed a new executive order to further back the work that DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, is doing. A White House official told the NTD that the order will make sure that all the agency heads will need to now work with DOGE to review and terminate all unnecessary contracts. And all travel expenses will also need to be reviewed. Meanwhile, while the administration is trying to cut spending, President Trump made clear today that he won't make any cuts to programs like the Social Security program or Medicare or Medicaid. And that's as he's also proposing a new way to bring in revenue and cut deficit, and that is by rolling out a new gold card program for wealthy foreigners to try to immigrate to the U.S., which for $5 million each. And he says that revenue from these cards sold will be used to reduce the U.S. deficit. Back to you.
Seems like more reforms are definitely coming. And Iris, President Trump also unveiled new foreign policy moves at the meeting. Tell us more.
Right. So President Trump today spoke more about his tariffs plans. He said today that he's still going to impose his tariffs on both Canada as well as Mexico, but he's moving the rollout date to April 2nd. Watch.
We've lost millions of people due to, it comes mostly from China, but it comes through Mexico and it comes through Canada. And I have to tell you that, on April 2nd, I was going to do it on April 1st, but I'm a little bit superstitious. So I made it April 2nd. The tariffs go on.
And President Trump also vowed to impose a 25% tariffs on EU goods, and that he says is to make sure that the trade relations become more balanced. Meanwhile, also today, Trump spoke about the Russia-Ukraine war. He confirmed that on this upcoming Friday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy will be visiting the White House to sign an agreement with the U.S. on its rare earth minerals. And meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance, who was also at the meeting, pushed back against media reports about early concessions being made to Russia. Watch.
We're not going to do the negotiation in public with the American media. He's going to do it in private with the president of Russia, with the president of Ukraine, and with other leaders. And I think that's how this has to go. I think I just want to push back against some of the criticism I've seen of the administration on this, because every single time the president engages in diplomacy, you guys preemptively accuse him of conceding to Russia. He hasn't conceded anything to anyone. He's doing the job of a diplomat.
And on Thursday, the UK Prime Minister will visit the White House and sit down with President Trump. Of course, at the top of their meeting agenda is how to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Back to you.
Iris, thank you very much. The Trump administration is fast-tracking government downsizing. The president is calling on agencies to finalize large-scale job cuts and restructuring plans by mid-March. In a memo today, President Trump orders agencies to prepare and submit Phase 1 agency reductions in force and reorganization plans by March 13th. The directive implements and expands Trump's February 11th executive order aimed at launching a critical transformation of the federal bureaucracy. Trump is directing agency heads to collaborate with the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, on developing their workforce reduction plans. A federal judge in Washington today extended a temporary restraining order that blocks the Trump administration from firing the head of a federal watchdog agency. District Court Judge Amy Berman Jackson said the head of the Office of Special Counsel could remain in his post through at least Saturday. The agency is not related to special counsels like Jack Smith, who are appointed by the Justice Department. Jackson previously issued a temporary restraining order after agency head Hampton Dellinger challenged the Trump administration for terminating his position. Dellinger argued that he wasn't given a reason for the firing. Jackson said she was extending the order to give herself more time to prepare a permanent ruling. Next, a House Oversight Subcommittee scrutinizes USAID as well as the actions the Trump administration has taken on the agency. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us some highlights from Capitol Hill.
And the debate continued with DOGE and USAID on Capitol Hill, with opinions divided fiercely along party lines. Republicans largely praising the Trump administration's actions, as well as what DOGE has uncovered, with House Democrats criticizing what the Trump administration has been doing, as well as defending some of USAID's programs.
Have some of the most anti-democratic principles like censorship and the canceling of elections been funded through USAID because of opposition to the ruling regimes? Yes. Has money through USAID been funneled to terrorists? Yes.
I spoke with people in charge of warehouses in Sudan and Ethiopia, warehouses full of food, but because of DOGE, that food is trapped in the warehouse, out of reach of starving and dying moms and kids.
Ranking Member Rep. Stansberry also said that China has already moved into some areas of South Asia that have had their funding cut. One witness testified that he found U.S. tax dollars are being used to prop up, quote, radical left-wing causes, and that he found elites have been influencing U.S. leaders to push, quote, unpopular policies on the American people through the bureaucracy.
These groups, which you can see on this chart, funnel cash to DEI, transgender, and climate alarmist causes, divisive issues that the Biden administration prioritized over addressing the concrete needs of the American people.
And during her closing remarks, Chair Green summed up USAID, saying that it's basically a type of, quote, globalist propaganda used to force regime changes. She continued saying that if it is indeed found that USAID funded terrorist organizations that resulted in the death of Americans, that criminal referrals will be made. Then Ranking Member Stansberry, during her closing remarks, urged Republicans to consider the real-world impacts of these cuts, saying that tens of thousands of people have been laid off and people are suffering around the world. She also called the activities of the Trump administration as, quote, illegal. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
As we reported earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is expected to travel to Washington on Friday to close a rare earth minerals deal with the U.S. But statements coming out of Washington and Kyiv make it appear that some details are still being ironed out. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the Ukraine update.
President Zelenskyy is going to be coming on Friday.
President Trump on Wednesday saying Washington and Kyiv are ready to sign a deal on rare earth minerals. Trump says the U.S. has so far sent much more money to Ukraine than European countries did.
We're in for probably $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. We've been able to make a deal where we're going to get our money back, and we're going to get a lot of money in the future, and I think that's appropriate.
Trump previously said the profits from Ukraine's minerals will act as compensation. The exact details of the agreement are not 100% clear yet, but Zelenskyy on Wednesday denied the notion that Ukraine is owing money to the U.S.
The main thing for me was that we are not in debt, and regardless of what it sounds like in the media, there is no debt of $500 billion, nor $350 billion, nor $100 billion, because it would not be fair to us.
And another issue, security guarantees. Ukraine wants the U.S. to help secure Ukraine after the fighting ends as part of the minerals deal. Here's what Ukraine's prime minister says about the issue.
We are not considering signing any agreements without security guarantees.
But President Trump said this during his first cabinet meeting on Wednesday.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor.
Zelenskyy says the exact details and the success of the deal depend on his talks with Trump on Friday. And Russian and U.S. delegations will meet in Istanbul on Thursday.
Our high-level diplomats and experts will meet and discuss the systemic problems that have accumulated as a result of the previous administration's illegal activities to create artificial obstacles for the Russian embassy.
Moscow has had no ambassador in Washington since the previous envoy left last October. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says high-level teams will work to restore the country's diplomatic missions in Washington and Moscow. This is part of the negotiations towards ending the conflict in Ukraine. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Thousands of people lined the streets of Israel today to honor members of the Bibas family who were killed in Hamas captivity. Meanwhile, Hamas terrorists have agreed to release the bodies of 4 more hostages in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. NTD's Jason Perry brings us the latest.
On Wednesday, thousands of people in Israel came out for the funeral for Shiri Bibas and her 2 sons, Ariel and Kafir, who were killed while in Hamas captivity. They made headlines for including 2 of the youngest hostages taken to the Gaza Strip during the October 7th terrorist attack. Ariel was 4 years old at the time, and his younger brother, Kafir, was only 9 months old. Many people wore the color orange and carried orange balloons as symbols of the 2 boys' red hair. Shiri's husband, Yarden Bibas, was also taken hostage that day and was later released. He addressed his late wife at the funeral, sharing a long-kept secret about their early relationship.
I didn't say it then because I didn't want you to think I was rushing to say, I love you. Shiri, I'll confess to you now. I already loved you back then when I said, mi amor. Do you remember our last decision together in the safe room? I asked if we should fight or surrender. You said fight, so I fought.
And he said this to his late son, Ariel.
Ariel, you made me a father. You transformed us into a family. You taught me what truly matters in life and about responsibility. The day you were born, I matured instantly because of you.
And he said this to his late son, Kafir.
I remember during the delivery, the midwife suddenly stopped everything. We were frightened and thought something was wrong. But it was just to tell us we had another redhead. Mom and I laughed and rejoiced. You brought more light and happiness to our little home.
There are still 63 hostages held captive in the Gaza Strip. This comes as Hamas terrorists agreed to release the bodies of 4 more hostages. They are the bodies of Shlomo Manzour, Sachi Idan, Ohad Yahalami, and Isaac El Garat. Hamas said they were going to release the bodies on Wednesday, but as of 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, there has been no public confirmation of their release. In exchange, Israel is set to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners the same day. And the first phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is set to expire on Saturday. President Trump was asked about phase 2 of the ceasefire.
Well, 4 bodies came in today. They think they're doing us a favor by sending us bodies. So, look, that's a decision that has to be made by Israel.
Phase 2 negotiations would include the release of all remaining hostages and a permanent end to the war in the Gaza Strip. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And several outlets, including Reuters and AP, are reporting that Hamas has handed over 4 bodies of Israeli hostages to the Red Cross. That's according to an Israeli security official who spoke on condition of anonymity. And around the same time, a Red Cross convoy carrying dozens of Palestinian prisoners left an Israeli prison. Next, turning our attention to public health. A school-aged child who tested positive for measles has died in West Texas. This marks the first U.S. measles death in about a decade. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says his department is tracking several measles outbreaks.
We are following the measles epidemic every day. There have been 4 measles outbreaks this year. In this country last year, there were 16. So it's not unusual. We have measles outbreaks every year.
There have been 124 confirmed measles cases so far in the Texas outbreak, which started in late January and has affected 9 counties. Authorities say most patients are under the age of 18. Measles is a respiratory virus that can survive in the air for up to 2 hours. The CDC says as many as 9 out of 10 people who are susceptible will get the virus if exposed. Most kids will recover from the measles if they get it, but infection can lead to complications like pneumonia, blindness, brain swelling, and even death. Coming up, with the recent bomb threats at the Kennedy Center in D.C. against Shen Yun Performing Arts, we hear from an MC from the company about the persistent attacks they've faced from the Chinese Communist regime. More details after the break. Next, we'll hear from Li-Shai Lemish, an MC at Shen Yun Performing Arts, about the persistent attacks Shen Yun has faced from the Chinese Communist regime since the dance company's inception. Lemish also addresses how, despite this, the company's founding mission continues to drive them to share universal truths and uplift audiences worldwide.
Li-Shai Lemish, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Steve.
It's great to have you with us, Li-Shai. Shen Yun, it's become a bit of a household name, whether you've actually seen the performance or seen the beautiful billboards when they come around during the touring season. You know, you guys are growing. You're back in the nation's capital right now to perform. What can we expect to see in a Shen Yun performance?
So if you've never seen Shen Yun, it's a celebration of 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. And we do this through dance, classical Chinese dance with a live orchestra, animated backdrops, soloists, MCs, and it's just amazing costumes. It's really a journey through ancient China, really a lost world that you can't see anywhere else today.
To your point, Shen Yun's tagline is China before communism. Talk to us about how this is such a significant aspect of the performance.
Yeah, so that's our mission, is to revive traditional Chinese culture, 5,000 years of civilization that was mostly lost and destroyed under the Communist Party in China. And so we're talking about the ancient legends, and not just the legends themselves, but the values that are behind them, the virtues, the ideas like loyalty and courage and compassion and integrity. And these are brought forth and they're carried really from one generation to the next through the stories. These values, even though they're Chinese in a way, they're actually universal. And that's why the performance is really so successful, because wherever we go, it resonates deeply with people of any nation, race, religion, country. They identify with it because something really very deeply human about the performance that really inspires and uplifts people.
And from what I understand, China has a very profound spiritual culture, and much of that was eradicated because of the Chinese Communist Party. Talk to us about how that culture clashes with communism.
So when the Communist Party came to power, really took over China in the middle of the last century, the first thing it set out to do was wipe out traditional Chinese culture and bring in this Soviet import of Marxism and Leninism and Stalinism, and later what became Maoism. And all of that import is really based on the ideas of violent atheism, materialism, and utilitarianism, which basically all comes down to it's what is in front of you right now that matters. There's nothing beyond it. There's no afterlife. There's no consequences. There's no right and wrong even. It's just about this very material world. And traditional Chinese culture is not about that at all. It's very much about consequences. What we say in the West, what goes around comes around, or karma, and they have a lot of expressions. And a lot of the heroes that really are so treasured throughout the generations are people who chose integrity and chose right over wrong, even with great sacrifice sometimes. And that's really antithetical to the Communist Party. So when they came over and they tried to basically change the culture in order to enable themselves to take over the country and establish the legitimacy, they had to wipe out this culture. Otherwise, how are you going to get students to beat up their teachers, or to turn on their parents during the Cultural Revolution, or to go and murder your neighbors? And they had to, you wouldn't do that if you believe that there's consequences, that you're going to have to face your ancestors, or you're going to be reincarnated, or there's karma, or there's heaven and hell, which were all these ideas that have been around for thousands of years in Chinese culture, as well as all over the world. And so really from that perspective, the values of this civilization are very deeply rooted, and communism sees them as a threat.
And so because of this mission, you all have faced tremendous adversity. Even right now, we're seeing bomb threats at the Kennedy Center. You say that this actually goes far beyond just the CCP hoax in these bomb threats designed to terrorize people. Put this into the proper context, if you could.
Right. So on our first day here in D.C., we're setting up for our performance, and a fire alarm went off. And the theater security came over the loudspeaker, said, "This is not a drill, evacuate immediately." And as we're walking out, the way the security guards were pushing us around and getting us as far away from the building, I said, "This is not a fire drill, and it's not even a fire. There's something else." It felt like what you would have if there was a mass shooting incident or a bomb. And turns out, after about 3 hours standing outside in the cold, it wasn't just us. There was like 6 performing arts companies at the Kennedy Center at the same time, standing outside, freezing. They had received a bomb threat. And this is part of a pattern. We've gotten about 20 of these in different theaters around the world, including 2 since then, in France and in Netherlands. And we've gotten them almost daily at our headquarters in New York. And basically, they're all just trying to scare people from seeing the show and to scare the performers from performing. Not a single show has been canceled. Not a single performer has been deterred. But you're right, Steve, it comes as part of a big pattern of 18 years of the Chinese Communist Party trying to stop Shen Yun, really from day one. So at first they would send other companies to try to compete with us. Then they would try to pressure the theaters to cancel our contracts, pull our advertising, try to hack our website, our ticketing sites, my personal email, slashing our tires, and now trying to weaponize social influencers and mainstream media to come after Shen Yun. I think they see how big a threat it is, even though it's just a dance show. It's a cultural event, but it is bringing back this lost heritage that they're really afraid of.
And, it does feel like these reports that you're speaking of these bomb threats, and mind you, as you mentioned, there is no threat or has been no threat to anybody's safety. It appears as though these are simply acts by the CCP just to terrorize people, as you mentioned. But why do you think you're seeing such an uptick right now? Does it maybe represent instability in China, or the threat that they see in Shen Yun?
Well, I think they're sensing that it's a desperate kind of end game type of battle for them. And there have been leaked documents coming out of China over the course of the summer last year saying that they really need to up the game against Shen Yun and against the broader Falun Gong community in the United States. Sometimes they may link it to Taiwan with an idea that if they were to take over Taiwan, and there's such a strong Falun Gong community in Taiwan that they would be a big resistance to the Communist Party. And so in order to uproot Falun Gong from Taiwan, they have to go after in the U.S. Shen Yun has gotten a lot of support from the United States government and governments around the world, from Congress and other people, and I think they feel like they want to undermine that and really create a conflict between Shen Yun and the American government and the American people.
Talk to us about Falun Gong, if you could, and also the relationship between Falun Gong and Shen Yun.
Sure. So Shen Yun Performing Arts was started by Falun Gong practitioners in New York in 2006. So Falun Gong became very popular in China in the 1990s, and by 1999 there were more people practicing Falun Gong than there were members of the Chinese Communist Party. Some of them were party members, some of them were artists, some of them were factory workers, but the Communist Party leader at the time said this is too many people doing this and we have to crush it. And we have to crush it within 3 months or it'll be the biggest embarrassment to the Communist Party. Of course, it's been 25 years, Falun Gong in China is not crushed. Outside of China, Falun Gong practitioners were caught rather flat-footed, not knowing what do we do, or that these people just like us in China who one day are meditating in the park now are being rounded up and thrown into labor camps and being tortured and killed. And so they started different activities, parades, and handing out flyers and lobbying Congress and media entities and trying to do all these different things online. And eventually, performing arts was one option of how to raise awareness about what's happening in China. And so you have these elite artists from around the world coming together and saying, let's revive traditional Chinese culture through performing arts and show the world what China was really like and the beauty of it. And at the same time, let's take this opportunity to show people the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, and not just the brutality of the persecution, but the courageous resistance to it and the hope that comes from the strong faith that these people have, and including non-Falun Gong practitioners standing up and supporting them. And that's been one of the most moving pieces, I think, in the performance for audience members. And it's also a big reason why the Chinese Communist Party is so afraid of Shen Yun, because these things are exposed on stage.
Li-Shai Lemish, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Coming up, President Trump says he wants to revive the Keystone XL pipeline, a project scrapped by the Biden administration that was designed to transport crude oil from Canada to the U.S. The founder of Power the Future joins us to discuss what's next for the pipeline and its possible impacts on the economy. House Republicans barely passed their budget resolution last night with not a single vote to spare. Negotiations unfolded up until the very last moment. Melina Wisecup has the details on what's in the budget and what's next. California Governor Gavin Newsom rolls out a new economic initiative aimed at strengthening the state's economy. With targeted funding, the plan focuses on speeding up Los Angeles' recovery. Christina Corona brings us more from LA when we come back. Welcome back. President Trump said on Monday he wants the Keystone XL pipeline built as soon as possible. The Biden administration scrapped the project as part of a commitment to renewable energy. The pipeline was designed to transport crude oil from Canada to the United States. Joining us now to discuss the future and impact of the pipeline is Daniel Turner, founder and executive director of Power the Future. Good to have you, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. In the Truth Social post, absolutely. In the Truth Social post announcing this, Trump promises easy approvals and an almost immediate start for whoever decides to finish the pipeline, if anyone does. The Keystone XL was started in 2010, as you know, and was plagued by lawsuits until its cancellation in 2021. Could Trump really guarantee a smooth ride for the potential builders?
Well, I think there are some steps that the government has to take to reassure the private sector. This is the problem with canceling the pipeline, and this really was an unprecedented act by President Biden. You have now scared off large investment infrastructure projects, especially in the energy space, that will last more than a presidential cycle. This was billions of dollars and years in the making. There was no bailout for the company. There was no recuperating their losses. So a project like Keystone or any large infrastructure project that is going to go beyond 2028, where's the incentive? It's not just financial because, again, imagine something like Keystone where you've got a Gavin Newsom running for president pledging in 2028 to cancel it. That's galvanizing for the left. and it's detrimental to your company's success. So there are some steps the president can take and government needs to take. But what Joe Biden did was he scared off future investment in America, and that's going to have long-term consequences.
Do you think those consequences will remain under Trump? I mean, he has a 4-year term in theory. What do you think?
Well, I think there are some things that they can propose. One, there is legislative fixes. There's the only reason why the president has the authority to cancel Keystone to begin with is because Congress abrogated their responsibility, and this goes back to telegraph wires in the 19th century. So Congress has just given up that authority, and they gave it to the president. Congress could take that authority back. That may put down some concerns for an infrastructure project. There's a bonding issue, which you see a lot in the private sector. The government could say that we'll go into an agreement where we will bond the requisite amount, and if we change our mind, then you recuperate your losses there. That's a smart thing that President Trump, as a builder, is well aware of how that process works. But sadly, again, to show the detriment that Joe Biden did to our economy, sadly, the president's word isn't going to carry enough for the billions of dollars of investment for a project that will last beyond 2028. There's no hope now that the president won't do something partisan and punitive because Joe Biden has now set the tone, and that scares off investment.
Yeah, and I know companies, of course, enjoy having consistency and predictability looking out into the future. Moving on, this project could create tens of thousands of temporary construction jobs. Besides this, if this pipeline actually does get built, what kind of economic impact could it have on the country as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this was the enthusiasm of the pipeline. We've been getting from this region of Canada, we've been getting crude oil for decades, but now it comes via train and via rail and truck. And on train, the most it can carry a day is around 60,000 barrels, which is a lot, right? But trains cost money. You have to have tens of thousands of gallons of diesel, and it's a long trip. The pipeline would have brought 850,000 barrels, so more than 10 times the amount of oil, and you don't have to pay for diesel, right? You don't have the same costs as trains or as trucks. And that would have been a huge influx of oil into our economy. Just go back a couple of years when Joe Biden was in Saudi Arabia asking for oil, when he lifted sanctions on Venezuela and Iran so that they would bring oil into our economy. Even Joe Biden, who hated oil and gas, even he knew that we needed more oil in our supply to lower prices. Well, markets were preparing for the Keystone pipeline, and then when it was pulled, markets responded by prices going up. So it would be huge to lower costs overall with a steady supply of 850,000 barrels a day. It would have really been a game changer.
Yeah, those are some pretty big numbers. Daniel, let's look at the international talk about this. The crude oil running through this pipeline will come from Canada, as we mentioned. How might Trump's tariffs on Canada impact the energy sector's willingness to take this project on?
That's another great point, right? Those tariffs are severe. So you may not see interest in the Canadian side. Think about this. Concurrently, right now, Canada is building pipelines west to bring natural gas to the Pacific coast for then sale in Asia and, if necessary, to China. Canada has just found other trading partners. And you can't really blame Canada for that when Joe Biden pulled the rug out from under them. So yeah, you can understand that Canada is going to do what's best for Canada. Again, all of this comes from the fact that this was an agreement made with the American government. And when Joe Biden reversed his position on this deal, he put the full faith and credit of the American government at risk. And President Trump is a master negotiator. He can assuage concerns, but the private sector is going to need some confidence before they jump back into projects of this magnitude.
And just in closing here, Daniel, do you think this pipeline will actually get built now that Trump has thrown his weight behind it? I mean, you sound maybe a little skeptical. I'm curious.
I'm going to hope it gets built because it's good for Canada. It's good for America. It's good for the world, quite frankly. So I am hopeful that it will get built, but I think there are going to have to be some steps taken to assuage a lot of concerns that industry has. And again, the only reason why those concerns are there is because this is what Joe Biden did to the economy, and that damage has to be undone.
All right, got it. Thank you so much. Daniel Turner, founder and executive director of Power the Future.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next, with no votes to spare, House Republicans last night passed their budget resolution. It paves the path to start crafting detailed policies on taxes, energy, the border, and immigration. President Trump on Truth Social this morning called the passing of this bill a, quote, big first step win for Speaker Mike Johnson and America. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more about this new budget framework.
The final vote was 215 to 217. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie was the only Republican to vote against this budget resolution. He says the spending cuts don't go far enough to cover the overall cost of this budget framework. This was a last-minute sprint for Johnson to secure all the votes needed to pass the budget resolution. Even up until the very last moment, he was on the floor during another vote, actually working on securing those last-minute votes. Here, let's listen to what Speaker Johnson said after he was able to pull it off in the final hours.
We had the requisite number of votes to move this process along, and now passing the budget resolution in the House that will go to the Senate. This is the first important step in opening up the reconciliation process. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we are going to deliver the America First agenda. We're going to deliver all of it, not just parts of it, and this was the first step in that process.
Now that the House has passed that budget resolution framework, the committees are now able to work on the details, crafting the actual legislation that will include the policy reforms as far as tax code goes, energy policy, border policy, immigration, and more. House Speaker Mike Johnson sent out an email overviewing what exactly this framework does. He said it grows the economy by $2.6 trillion over 10 years. It saves around $830 billion worth of discretionary spending. As for mandatory spending, they have to reach a floor of $1.5 trillion in savings, with the goal of reaching $2 trillion in savings over the next 10 years. It also raises the debt ceiling by $4 trillion, which should give the Trump administration some wiggle room over how to allocate federal funds over the next 2 years or so. Democrats, however, are taking issue with the maneuver of federal funds. Listen in.
Let's be clear about the kind of money we're talking about. You know what it costs to keep a kid on Medicaid? $10 a day. How about keeping that child fed with SNAP benefits? $6 a day. What do Republicans want to give away to the already rich? $6 million per billionaire.
And just to be clear, this budget blueprint does not include specific details of where Republicans will get those savings from. But now we have to wait and see how the details of this final budget will play out. Will Republicans ultimately hold up their vow not to touch the substance of social safety net programs and instead only target waste, fraud, and abuse? As for what this means for the Senate, well, the Senate has already passed its own separate proposal of a budget resolution. So ultimately, the House and the Senate will need to come together in a conference to be able to craft a final budget proposal that both chambers can agree on, enough so that they can get enough support in both chambers to get the budget to the president's desk. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
California Governor Gavin Newsom unveils a major economic initiative aimed at boosting the state's economy. The plan includes targeted support to speed up Los Angeles' recovery. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
California Governor Gavin Newsom sat with Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation CEO Stephen Chung at East LA College today to discuss how California can recover financially.
Newsom's initiative is to boost California's economy by supporting regional economic development from the ground up.
California is not one economy. It's the intersection of so many different economies. We're the size of 21 state populations combined, after all. So by definition, any real economic and workforce development plan had to be bottom up, not top down.
Instead of a top-down approach, the state collaborated with 13 regions to create locally driven economic plans.
We provided that $5 million grant up front. Then we did those 8 pilot programs, $39 million, because we wanted to prove to you we meant business. And we put that $39 million to work. And then you said we need more. And we provided each one of the regions an additional $14 million to take the plans to the next level.
He also said there's an additional $140 million available for ready-to-go projects. Newsom held up a book titled State Economic Blueprint as he spoke, describing his plan as a reflection of California's aspirations, concerns about displacement, and the effects of global economic shifts, including tariffs. Newsom also provided an update on Southern California's wildfire recovery efforts, announcing the official completion of Phase 1 debris removal.
Yesterday was an important milestone. Was the most comprehensive and aggressive hazardous waste debris removal that has ever been advanced by the federal government. They were able to actually achieve their goal, which was a stretch goal to begin with, of getting all the hazardous waste done within 30 days.
He noted that the wildfire recovery has moved into Phase 2 of debris removal, currently being carried out by the Army Corps of Engineers. Newsom also mentioned additional opportunities to boost the economy, like the Olympic Games, the FIFA World Cup, and the Super Bowl, which will be coming here in 2027. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, the Supreme Court heard arguments in the case of an Ohio woman who claimed she was demoted because she is heterosexual. A decision in her favor could change how workplace discrimination cases are dealt with across the country. And in the NFL, the players have spoken. Report cards on all 32 teams. Dave Martin joins us to reveal which teams made the grade when we come back. The Supreme Court is signaling it will make it easier for Americans to file reverse discrimination lawsuits. The High Court heard arguments today in the case of an Ohio woman who claimed she was denied a promotion and demoted because she is straight. Marlene Ames filed a lawsuit in 2020 against her employer, Ohio's Department of Youth Services. Lower courts ruled against her, so she appealed to the Supreme Court. Ames is challenging a requirement in some U.S. courts that plaintiffs from majority groups provide more evidence to move a discrimination case forward than someone from a minority group. All the justices, both conservative and liberal, seemed to be in agreement on the case. If they rule in her favor, Ames will be able to refile her lawsuit. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on in sports. Let's start in the NFL. As the Players Association released their annual report cards grading each franchise in a number of different categories, the Miami Dolphins received the highest overall grade. What stood out to you the most?
You know, a lot of things really. You know, just for some clarity, there were 11 different categories that players graded their franchises for, you know, including the weight room, the locker room, the owner, the head coach, the training staff, hotel accommodations. It was like everything. I was probably surprised most to see the Kansas City Chiefs ranked near the bottom overall, 26 out of 32 teams. Just because I would have thought the more successful teams would be towards the tops, but the Chiefs players did not like their locker room, gave it a D-. Now, meanwhile, the bottom 5 teams overall, you had Pittsburgh, the Jets, Cleveland, New England, and Arizona was last. So still surprising to see like successful franchises there like the Patriots and Steelers at the bottom too. The biggest thing probably was the seeing the lowest ranked owner was Jets owner Woody Johnson. Now players gave him an F overall, describing some issues that the team has as, quote, top-down problems. Now, Johnson was kind of busy this last year. He fired the team's coach after a 2-3 start. That backfired. The assistant coach who took over went just 3-9. He also fired the team's general manager, so it was a busy year for him and not in a good way.
And staying with the Jets, the team's new head coach, Aaron Glenn, said yesterday the team's decision to move on from quarterback Aaron Rodgers upset some players. Did he say which players were most upset here?
Well, he said he talked to Quinn Williams. He's our Pro Bowl defensive tackle, who posted a thumbs down emoji on X when it was announced Rodgers will not be a Jet next year. Other than that, it's really speculation. But as a season ticket holder myself, I can say I was not thrilled with the move either. Now, last year it was a disappointing season. They had a 5-12 record despite a very talented roster. To me, though, Rodgers has taken really too much of the blame. I mean, I understand he's won 4 MVP awards. He is 40 years old, though, and he was coming off of a major injury. He had a torn Achilles the year before. And in reality, he had 3,900 passing yards last season, 28 touchdowns, both the third highest single season totals in franchise history. I think lost in the discussion of what went wrong last year was when their head coach was fired 5 games in the season. Their defense went from allowing 17 points per game to 27 points per game afterwards. So it's really tough to win like that. Either way, it was not a great year for the Jets.
All right, and moving on to women's basketball. WNBA great Diana Taurasi has announced her retirement on Tuesday. That's after 20 seasons and 11 All-Star selections. Where do you think she ranks in terms of the all-time greats?
I would say, probably at the top. She's the league's all-time leading scorer. She's the league's all-time leading three-point shooter. She's led the league in scoring 5 times. She won 3 WNBA titles. She won an MVP. The list really goes on. This past summer, she won her 6th gold medal at the Olympics. That's the most ever by a woman. You could really say she was the face of the league, really, for the last 2 decades. Played for Phoenix her entire career. They drafted her first overall in 2004. Even in college, she won 3 national titles in her 4 seasons at UConn. She was voted by the fans as the GOAT in 2021 for the league's 25th anniversary. So she's very well regarded, and for good reason. So we'll definitely miss seeing Diana Taurasi on the court.
It's always so awesome to hear about the all-stars. Any of these major league players are amazing, but then when you talk about the best of the best, it's incredible.
Best of the best, that's right.
Shifting gears to college basketball, 10 ranked teams are in action tonight, including number 1 Auburn, which hosts Ole Miss.
Yeah, even though they're unranked, Ole Miss is a very good team too. They're 19-8 on the season, 8-6 in the SEC, which has been the best basketball conference this year. Now, normally they're tops in football, but they're doing it in basketball as well. So that game starts at the top of the hour. Right now, already in action, number 8 Michigan State is playing at number 16 Maryland. The Spartans are tied for first in the Big Ten. Maryland is 4th. Later on, you got number 7 St. John's at Butler. Now, the Red Storm, they are 24-4 this year. This is Rick Pitino's 2nd season in Queens. They lead the Big East. This is already the most wins they've had since 2000. There's still like 5 regular season games left. Pitino, meanwhile, he's 72 years old. He's certainly a leading candidate to win another National Coach of the Year. Pretty amazing what he's done there in a very short amount of time.
Well, Dave Martin, thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Chris.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Chris Beers. Good night.